If it's all right, we get started a little bit here. So, okay, just on a couple of things for the rest of the group gets here. Just to kind of give you an overview, I just linked the meeting we had back in March. So if you just wanted to go back and look at any of that material, not that spend a lot of time tonight. So there's a reference. I've got a short video I wanted to share with you that was put together and kind of in collaboration with Glasgow, the Business Officials Association, and then the Wisconsin School Public Relations Association on school finance. So it's only like a 3-minute video. And then spend a fair amount of time looking at kind of our forecast projections, some of the adjustments that are reflected in that 4-year projection. We want to spend some time looking at Fund 80. What's Fund 80? What programs are in there? And then the work we've done to date on some budget reduction revenue ideas. And then look at referendum results. Talk about an article on school finance would be in the Community Connection draft community survey, which came about from this last meeting we had in March. Consideration for a potential November operational referendum, some debt service payoff scenarios. I want to share that with the board. Talk a little bit about cost per student, some variables with that, and then anything else we want to talk about tonight. So I think that'll be a full enough agenda, and then if we decide we want to schedule another meeting. So
just a question on healthcare costs. You know, we've switched to a new program. I'm just curious, have you had a chance to look at that at all, and then how we're doing in comparison to budget at all?
we have, Ed. I think it's way too early to make any kind of.
Yeah, because we're only, what, 3 months into it?
Yeah, we started in January, and a lot, when you change health plans, either self-funded or fully insured, there's this legacy costs that are all being shifted, as you know, to the old plan. So we haven't incurred a huge amount of expenses yet, but I don't know if that's an indication of our direction or not. So I think we'll have a better idea. We've talked with USI a little bit, probably in the fall, where we can really do some serious. I will say, so far, just looking month to month, I mean, it looks better than it has. And the discounts we're seeing, seem to reflect what we were hoping for. So, but I don't know if I can make conclusions exactly on it. Does that make any sense?
Yep. They don't have any data on usage.
Yes, we do.
Okay.
Yes, we have that. But again, it's just looking at a
Takes a while for billing to come through.
Yeah, I mean, all of that. I mean, it takes 45, 60 days plus, and so it's amazing. But so I think, for the first 2 months, we didn't see hardly anything, to be honest with you. But now it's starting to catch up. So
they told us this first year you're going to have a reprieve by about 2 months worth of. It was just the way the cycle is before we get some next year because of that delay in the billing.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
So, I don't know if that helps at all.
No, it does. Anyway. Makes sense.
You get that one-time savings.
Yeah.
Annual budget.
Yeah.
When you shift over.
Right. It is interesting because you do have opportunities to see, what things really are charged, and then what we end up paying are very different numbers.
Yep.
Which I don't think is probably a shock to anyone here, but it's just part of the industry. How it works or doesn't work, depending on your view. Great question. So, and we'll probably talk a little bit more of that when we go into the forecast a little bit in terms of what we're assuming and how we want to adjust that. So, but to get things started, I was just going to share this. Again, it's a real quick video. I'm curious, maybe as we go forward in terms of communication with the community, if you think something like this would be helpful. This is kind of a base communication that they put together, and it's just free for all school districts, and then it can be modified and customized for each district if you choose.
I kept receiving multiple emails
About that,
About
yeah,
those,
they've been kind of average. So anyway, we'll kind of look at that quick.
If you love old, real wood furniture, you will love this lab. I use it all the time. Our public schools are the cornerstone of our community. The education and opportunities we provide for students today
Bottom
shape
right
their
corner.
futures and ours. Schools, like any organization, need money to operate. But in Wisconsin, funding the needs of our schools has been a
Used to
growing
be.
challenge.
I don't see it.
State policy limits how much school districts can spend. The vast majority of school funding comes from a combination of state dollars and local property taxes. It's called the revenue limit, and it acts as a cap per student that school districts can spend each year. Even if school costs go above this level, schools can't spend any more than this limit. From 1994 to 2009, these revenue caps were adjusted for inflation, which meant they helped schools keep up with ongoing needs. But since 2010, the resources districts need to survive have fallen farther and farther behind the basic costs to operate our schools. By the end of 2025, the revenue limit will have fallen more than $3,300 per student behind inflation. With a district of 1,000 students, that's a decrease of more than $3 million. What's more, each district has a different revenue cap, and these caps are not tied to the needs of the students or the cost to the schools that serve them. Our job as a school district is to make sure all of our students have access to the exceptional educational opportunities we provide, no matter what their needs when they walk through our doors. But state funding falls short of what it costs to meet the specific needs of many of our students. When that happens, we have to use money from our general fund to cover the difference, which means taking dollars from other important needs. The largest portion of our budget goes towards staffing. Our people are the heart of our schools. Without enough educators to instruct, support, and inspire learning, schools can't provide the lessons, programs, and opportunities our students deserve. Other important budget items include curriculum, technology, transportation, operations, and maintenance. School districts work hard to balance their budgets, yet resources for schools have been shrinking year after year since 2010. With costs growing so much faster than funding, districts are always looking for ways to trim costs and work smarter, like deferring needed school maintenance, cutting programs, reducing staff, and many other strategies. But schools can only cut so much before they start to harm educational opportunities for their students. To maintain class sizes, keep up with rising costs, take care of school buildings, and protect high-quality instruction, many districts have turned to their community to help fill the state-imposed funding gap. Since the arrival of revenue limits, over 80% of school districts have done so by asking local voters to raise their caps through an operating referendum. Most have used the option multiple times. Our children don't have time to wait for state policymakers to fix the school funding system. By putting the needs of our students first, we are investing in their potential and the future of our whole community. Strong schools make strong communities where families want to move and stay. Learn more about school finance in Wisconsin by visiting our websites.
Have you heard of this brand new product that instantly cleans toilets without any scrubbing? Take any dirty.
We don't know about that. Furniture sale. So I wish you could have seen the larger view, but it's there so you can access it at any point in time. So it might be something that might be valuable to us as we move forward. I think that the challenge always is having, we call it the elevator speech, that 2 or 3 minutes with someone and what you share with them about how school finance works. And having them feel comfortable with their explanation. So sometimes, words say a million words relative to a video. So that might be one source we could post on our website and have it available to the public. So any questions with that? It's pretty simple. So the main thing I want to kind of jump into, great. Kathy's here now. Perfect timing, Kathy. We were just showing a quick video that's available to you that was put together by a group that it's like 3 minutes. So you can kind of watch it when you have a chance. There's also food in back of you there.
Yeah,
so please. So I'm going to jump into can I do something with this, Jason?
You can click on the middle
Hide it.
and then slide it down to the bottom.
Perfect. Thank you.
That's about as good as.
That's about as good as it gets, okay. So, a lot of numbers here, but I want to share with you a couple of updates that has happened since December when we were looking at doing budget projections. So I'm thinking of the Financial Stability Committee and the report they put together back in December, which was presented to the board on the 18th. So there's 4 areas that have been updated, and I want to go over kind of those 4. The first one is, as the year goes on, we get better estimates from the state on how much money we're going to get through the state equalization aid. Although the dollar amount is set each year, and it's set as part of the state budget, the distribution changes based upon the budgets that are finalized for each of the school districts across the state. So as we get more information about what the budgets were that they submitted to the DPI, we're able to go in and look at the calculations and adjust those to reflect that. So what does all that mean? There's a formula, and I won't spend a lot of time going through the formula, but allows us to adjust how the formula works relative to what's called primary, secondary, and tertiary aids. So as we get that information reported to the state, these can be adjusted to reflect how the aid dollars will actually get distributed to school districts. The other variable for us is we're able to calculate then, and it's always a look back for 1 year, our membership numbers. And because state aids are based on the average between September and January, once we know our January count, we can put those dollars in there, and that's what you see in yellow, and then that affects in terms of how the aid dollars work. Because we're considered a negative aided school district, which basically means the property value behind each and every student is higher than typical around the state, we don't get as much money as some other schools. Right? If you look at Lake Geneva, Williams Bay, it's even the extreme there. They don't get hardly anything. So as we're looking at these numbers and seeing an increase in our January membership number, that helps us for state aids. So that was the first change.
That's a pretty big increase for resident students.
It is. That helps a lot.
2796 to 282.
28, yeah. Over 30 students, yeah. Then as we kind of go through this, as I look at expenses, there was one line item for, would be the cost of what we call transfer of service between Fund 10 and 27 that needed to be increased to reflect the overall increase in the budget. So I had it at 0. That was now moved to 2%. So I made that change. The third change was recalculating special ed aid. Because I realized that as the expenses are going up from year to year, and even if the state stays at that 30%, which is about where they're at today, the dollars will increase to reflect that. I mean, that's a fair assumption. And the last change, which might be the most significant, is we were assuming that the property valuation would go up about 3% a year. And I think in reality, we know it could be much larger than that, but most of that ends up being just market appreciation. So it really isn't new tax base. So I lowered those all to 2% to reflect probably what is closer to actual new tax base. Now, I can tell you some districts have used 10%, 16%, that should show a huge reduction in the mill rate. But in reality, unless that's really new tax base, it's not going to be a reduction in their taxes. Does that make sense in correlation? So it's probably more of a conservative look. But I think it's probably more of an accurate look at how it's really going to affect taxpayers. So when you factor in the referendum or potential referendum, so these numbers didn't change. So that's the recommendation from the committee. And then also the reductions of 1.25 this year, another 500,000 and continuing, you end up with a levy or tax rate increase of about 3.31%. And you'll see going forward that 3% is relatively constant. Now, one of the ways that works that way is we're also then reducing what's called our Fund 39 levy, which is our debt service.
Mhm.
And we talked about paying off the debt. So paying off that debt early allows us to reduce the overall impact of any proposed referendum. So when you begin to look at those numbers, what you see is the mill rate then using a 2% increase goes from 681 to 703, which is a 23 cents per thousand. $100,000 home would be $23. $300,000 home, $67 and change for an increase.
And,
That's hardly any.
That's a huge difference.
and we
Huge difference.
just use the term $100,000 of property.
Right.
Right,
Because if we say a home, you
Yeah.
can't get a home.
Right.
But it's
Right.
easy in most.
The last one was what, 130 per, so this is.
Say the last one, you mean the last referendum?
Yeah, the one
the
that failed.
last, yeah,
Most
Yes,
recent
it was for two questions, it was like $215.
Yeah.
yeah,
Right.
Oh,
on a
So-
$300,000.
On $100,000.
On 100,000, so it would have been
Yes.
like more like
Oh.
a six, I remember like my
$600
taxes were gonna be
bucks.
affected about a little over 500.
But remember, that's assuming it was $6 million.
Yeah.
Year one, even though we told people that it probably would never be that amount,
Right,
but that's.
That's
what they see in here.
Max.
yeah,
So the impact is about that type of increase each year for 4 years.
It's compounded, so
It's
in year two,
compounded.
it's 130.
Yes,
Then
and then
100,
another, yeah.
197.
you understand? So,
And that mill rate is still and I know that's not the tax impact, but when you're looking at that comparable to what are the other mill rates in the area, then even at 770, I'm sure you could pull up that chart, but that's still amongst the lower in the area, if I recall.
yeah, in terms of mill rate. So one of the things that we started to look at, it was kind of the end of the work of the Financial Stability Committee was, and one of the members made this comment and kind of sunk into me is, people don't distinguish between taxes for debt, taxes for this or that. They just see a
Right.
tax bill.
right,
So what this is showing is the overall tax rate for the Elkhorn Area School District. So it includes our debt, our operations, our community service fund, all of that together. Which, I think the impact is probably much different, like you mentioned, Adam, than what we had in our last referendum. And part of it is the phase-in. So if we were looking at the total amount year one, you'd add those four numbers together, and that would give you kind of what that would look like. Does that make sense to everyone?
I think when you look at the rate up above, I like how it's smoothed as well, because that's the total tax rate per thousand, it's, right around that 3% mark of an increase. It's not a huge spike.
Right.
in any one year.
To get to that, basically was looking at paying off that debt in such a fashion over the next 4 years that provided that level increase each year.
okay.
That's kind of how it got to that number, so. Which again, I think from a communication and an impact for our taxpayers, people can understand the concept of, I'll say $70 a year increase for each year for 4 years, or 67. Again, these are projections as of today, so the numbers, could change. But, I think we know what our revenue cap is, relative to what the state's gonna have, at least for this next year. As we look at 2026, 27, 28, these are forecasts, but it's not unlike any other forecasts that we have done.
Right. And so, other than reducing the debt, what else are we looking at up top?
Where's the
Yeah.
fund balance percentages?
Yeah, the fund balance is about the same. I think if you go back, and I can pull it up, the recommendation that came from the Financial Stability Committee, I think this number was like negative 16,000 after 4 years. So, I mean, it's not exact, but it's pretty close when you look at that kind of.
Yeah, for projection.
Yeah. And I even ran these, now I know one of the contacts at Baird, so because this is such a large spreadsheet, I say, can you validate my numbers? I
Yeah.
can do that, so I feel pretty confident with
Yes. Thank you for doing that. That's,
So, now, obviously, there's a lot of details here I know we're gonna be talking about, but I wanted to give you kind of the overall
Yeah.
concept first. That you really still, and certainly, if there is no referendum, you back these numbers out, well, then the levy actually would go down, potentially. So I'm confused a lot. In other words, if we decided we're not, don't need it, I just hypothetically,
Yeah,
then suddenly these dollars would go down.
Unless the board chose to do that.
but that would require us to cut.
yes.
Even more.
Yeah.
I'm not saying it's a good idea.
Yeah.
No, if you didn't cut anything, it would come out of your fund balance.
Yeah,
You know,
for a while.
For a while.
Until
That
you
just
ran out
puts
of
the,
that. Yeah.
puts the district in that much greater
Yeah.
jeopardy, but.
Right, that's
Right.
kind of good.
Yeah, by no means am I recommending that. I just, as you look at this, okay, you can talk about what's the cost of the referendum, but I think it really does come back also to what's the impact overall for my taxes. I want to go understand the taxes.
Yep,
That's the bottom line question.
Yep,
That-
absolutely. that's all the taxpayer
They
cares
want
about.
to, Yeah.
They just don't, I don't want to say they don't trust what we say, but, you know, like that video,
Yeah,
you know, it's a great video.
it gives an explanation, but it doesn't,
I don't care.
exactly. They just want to know how much more my
how much
taxes
is,
gonna be.
and why do I have to pay if I don't have kids in the district?
Right.
My kids are grown, they're out. Kyle's nodding.
Well, that's all I hear.
That's, yeah.
Yep. Yep,
And you can't argue with that, but
Right.
you know, I haven't had kids in the, I moved here,
Mhm.
never had kids in the district, and someone paid for your education, but they
Right.
don't acknowledge that someone paid for their education.
right, right. Yeah, I mean, it is the truth. I just talked with a woman last week that
Mhm.
they're looking at buying land in the district, and she wanted to know, like,
Yeah. How is this gonna
how is
impact
this
me?
gonna impact her,
Mhm.
her tax? She's like, cause our kids are grown and they are moving to the district without kids, so they have a choice of which district they wanna
Mhm.
move to.
You pull up that mill rate.
Yeah,
Um,
surrounding area, nobody's.
I
So
can't,
know
I'm just
you
trying to
have
think
go
where it's
back
at.
on that.
The DPI has something, I don't know if I can find it real quick.
So I keep thinking about your elevator speech comment and what bullet points to have
Right.
kind of ready. Mill rate would be good. Just compare to other local areas.
Yeah,
You know,
even
There
then,
you go.
people don't really know what their
they're
bill
gonna,
rate
they're gonna
is.
gloss
They,
over at
they,
some point.
they get a little glassy eyed.
Yeah.
Right, honestly, the biggest messaging
Development's
is,
below ours right
it's-
now.
it's less than.
Go back up and
um,
see what.
It's less than $70 a year,
Right.
which is less than it costs you to go out for dinner.
We,
That's just a high school.
Yeah.
Yeah.
so the more property value you have, the lower your.
Lower, yeah. So the rates vary greatly.
Like what's Burlington?
Yeah,
Yeah, Burlington would be good. Burlington is
6.92.
682. So there's a little less,
692.
692.
and what was ours? I missed it.
703.
6 something, it would be 770.
681 right now. So,
At the end of the, it would be 770, but
yeah. So we're about 10 cents, it's a little bit less than Burlington. I think Delavan is less than ours, but they have a lot more. Yeah, see, theirs is 635.
They got a lot more state aid, or they
Well, they've got,
negative.
I think their
tertiary.
business development is larger.
it is.
I'm sure it would be with all the,
They also have Delavan Lake, which
oh yeah. Even though we have Lauderdale, but they, Delavan.
those property values are
Mhm.
quite a bit higher
Yeah.
than what we're gonna have in
Yeah.
Elkhorn.
Yeah, so, and again, here's Elkhorn, again, at 681. East Troy, it's right about the same, 679.
Their district is struggling from what I understand.
If you look at Lake Geneva, you'd have to add
Yeah.
those two together.
Right.
to kind of Get a comparison. And then the other ones contiguous would be, like a Williams Bay.
Oh, don't look at theirs.
I was gonna
Yeah,
say-
Theirs is low.
Bigfoot.
And then Whitewater.
Yeah, Whitewater.
Whitewater's a little higher.
Mhm.
Bigfoot, yeah.
Oh, that would be under Fontana.
Well, that's,
Oh,
Fontana's a-
Yeah, high school.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
right.
So 2.17, and then what's the other worst?
that one's hard because they have a bunch of different districts.
Right,
Yeah, you'd have to put
They have
them,
Walworth and
right.
Fontana and.
hard to compare the high school
Yeah.
districts.
Well, the elementary and Bigfoot's elementary is in
Walworth.
or
They
Fontana.
have Walworth, Fontana.
Oh, yeah.
Reed.
Oh, they have, oh, they have Reed. Oh,
They have four.
got it.
Oh, excuse me.
So, Anyway, so when we did these assumptions, or when we did these, we made certain assumptions. As for this year, we minimized obviously the increase in compensation for most of the groups. And we used 10% health insurance going forward, 5% utilities, pretty much a 3% in everything else, and then the 325. I just saw today that the Wisconsin Manufacturing and Commerce made a motion to take a court case to the Supreme Court to try to renege the increase of 325 for 400 years that the governor wrote into the budget. So we'll see what, they asked the Supreme Court to review that. So that was just happened today. So we'll see where that goes. One of the things I wanted to kind of share with the committee here, though, let's see if I can. I think this is okay. We put this together again based on kind of a 3% increase in compensation for groups and a 10% for health insurance. I'm going to do, because I think it'd be easier for us to view, is just to hide this. And you can kind of see the dollar deficit. One of the things the personnel committee met and talked about a little bit this morning is many districts line up their adjustments each year with the CPI for salaries. And this year, which now is almost last year, the CPI was about 8%. And some districts went as high as 8%. Some did 6%. As you know, we provide our professional staff 1.4%. So the new CPI calculation for next year is 4.1%. So we built in 3% at this point. So one of the things is started just kind of plug around is, well, what would happen if it was that 4.1%? How does that adjust our budget? And what other things would we have to adjust if we wanted to stay within that same dollar figure overall budget? So what I'll do and I realize there's been no decisions on any of this, but I'm just going to plug in same numbers here for all groups. And that is actually a little over a $300,000 increase. So the 1.7 becomes $2 million deficit. Kind of getting back to your question, you asked earlier about health insurance. Well, are we going to really need a 10% increase in health insurance? The crystal ball question, right? Maybe it'll be more, maybe it'll be less. So if you start working with just that number, and let's just assume we use like a 5%. It's actually, I think, 4.8 gets you to about the same dollar amount overall by looking at a wage adjustment of 4.1 rather than 3%. Now that's just playing with numbers in terms of health insurance and salary, but
It's making a leap on a piece of the puzzle
Yeah.
over which we had zero control.
right.
But,
You know.
well, I disagree, we have complete control over both those pieces.
Well, the health
Yes.
insurance, if we continue on.
Right,
Yeah.
but what I mean by that is there's a choice that the district can make in regards to how much we're going to cover the cost of the health insurance and or how much salary. In Wisconsin for years, and I used to be a part of the union, the negotiation back when the QEO was there. At least the district I worked in, they always wanted to maintain the health insurance and they would trade the salary increase to maintain the health insurance. And what I mean by we have control is if, one, maybe we have good luck and the shift in the plan works and the quote doesn't come back that high. Well, let's say the quote does come back that high. We have complete control over how much the district is going to cover and how much the employees have to cover in order to continue in the plan, if that makes sense.
Okay.
I like my concern is we're finding it harder to get the employees, and because where our salary schedule, we reviewed this at the personnel committee, was extremely competitive in CISA 1 and 2, which is really our comparables. We're falling now after a couple of years of not being close to what the other districts in the area have increased their compensation. And I would rather have that bump on the increase for the salary than in the insurance. And at the end of the day, the employees will benefit more by having more towards salary than benefit. Because I know, Kyle, you're retired. They never factored in the compensation you got for your insurance in your retirement.
No.
Check monthly, right? So that, but your income does get, and so it's beneficial to them to have the highest possible income they can have. But that's, I just mean, those are two levers we can pull and push either way. The district can say, no, we budgeted 5%, we can't cover anything above 5%. And that is a choice. So you could leave it at 10% and reduce the other level. Yeah. You could say, we're going to do 0% on insurance. And if it's higher than that, that's too bad, but we want all that, what would go to insurance to go to the employees.
So one of the things that kind of going into that a little bit is some timetables that will be coming up fairly quickly. Today, the personnel committee met. Obviously we do have our workshop. Reorganization meeting for the school board will be Monday night, the 22nd. On the agenda is to talk about professional staff compensation as a closed session item. But by May 13th, actually May 15th, we need to provide contracts to our professional staff. So suddenly the dates are starting to come together fairly quickly. Traditionally here in Elkhorn, we have usually settled on the increases and the adjustments by that time, and when the teachers got their contract, they knew they were paid for next year. That's traditionally how we've done it. Now, there's nothing that requires that. I mean, in other districts, some districts wait until they finalize their budget before they make those adjustmts. They get their contract as the same salary figure, and then the wages are determined, at a different date. Back in the day, and Kyle could remember this, when we negotiated many times, we didn't have a settlement. Once the settlement was determined, then that retro was all processed. So those are just a couple of ways to look at this. I'm not saying that one is right or one is wrong. But certainly the contract piece, we do need to move forward with that for professional staff. So anyway, again, tonight, no decisions need to be made on that, but, those are some of the numbers that we're kind of tossing around. And certainly we have this divided into three groups. We have professional, administrative, and support. And, I just plugged in 4.1 for all three groups, but obviously what the board decides to do with all the groups is up to the board.
Right.
So, questions? Other questions of the board has?
So when was the last time that administrators and supervisors had a pay raise?
The year before.
Okay,
Yeah.
because so the year before last, but then before that, like the year or two before that, we froze them too, right?
It's been some years before that.
Because I know that I was on the board when we froze them before last year.
Yeah. And that may have been over 6, 7 years ago, more than 6 years ago, the latest, I guess, was that year. But as you know, for generally.
It was the year before I got here.
I think
So
that's
a
right.
while ago, I think you may have been still hearing about it.
Yeah.
They weren't happy.
No, I just thought, I could have sworn that we froze them.
I don't think we've
Before
frozen.
I don't think
since
since
I-
then.
Okay, all right.
No.
Cause we've grown our fund balance every year since
Yeah.
I've been here. There hasn't been we've been able to manage through all those strategies for the last 10 years, so
Okay.
last year was the first year.
That was the
since
first
I've
year,
been
okay.
here.
I think for almost every year, well, at least going back, since Jason's been here, the increase on a percentage has been probably the same for each of the three groups.
Got it.
And I think this year was the year that
This is
we
the
did
first
just
year.
the step, which
Yeah.
happened to be 1.4, 1.5, and
Yep.
then the administration froze it.
Okay.
So, again, I think there's some flexibility in what the board wants to do here, but I wanted to at least show. And again, the 5% is either how we end up in doing the actuary study for next year's rates, and that would be great if it's 5% or less. Or it could be additional cost passed on to the.
If it's not, then there's things that the insurance committee or the board could look at. One is either passing the costs on to the insurance users. Two would be narrowing the network or changing the structure. To this point, we haven't truly narrowed the network. We've left it that you can go anywhere that you want. And that's what we strive to maintain. Like Delavan, they went with it's Lean Healthcare. That's your network. And if you have to drive, so be it. That's what your choice is. I'm not saying that's a good thing or the record. There's still tools that we haven't utilized in the health insurance piece. My hope is that it comes back at a good rate and that the strategies work and that we minimize the impact. But we do have an aging staff, so.
When will you know?
I think we'll get a projection. I talked with Scott Fuller, USI, last week, and they're our insurance consultants, and he figured probably by fall, maybe August, September, we'll have a pretty good indication of what the rates. And again, because we're self-funded, it isn't the insurance carrier that determines that, it's the school district, but they'll recommend these projections of what that should be. So I mean, technically, you could say, we may know that before the budget's finalized, because that doesn't happen until October.
I mean, our stop loss, what was our gap insurance,
Stop loss.
that may go up depending on our high cost
Right, I'm gonna get that,
claims, yeah.
Yeah.
So it's,
so,
Phil, can you go back to the timeline for a second?
yeah, absolutely.
Just curious, do we have, like, if we decide to go to referendum, when do we have to have that question
Well, that's a good.
defined?
The technical answer is, August 27th. If you want to go in the November referendum, and that's like the last stage.
Yeah, yeah.
Right.
So we need to have one prior to that.
Yeah.
yes.
Typically, the board will want to review language,
Right.
talk about that at least probably 2 meetings before.
So we
Or-
wanna-
or-
do we want to start?
So probably the annual meeting in July.
I think it would make sense in that time.
Yep.
To be ready with the decision.
Well, and I think we want to start getting information out because we know the annual meeting was, among other things, there were questions about the referendum
Right.
there last year, so we need to be prepared to speak intelligently about it at the annual meeting.
Yeah.
Is there any reason to do it sooner rather than later? Get decided the referendum and get it out there.
I think when you have the question formulated, you can start the education and communication process. I don't know if going too early
Yeah.
just defeats people,
Because
but
even from August, you've still got,
I like that July time.
Yeah. I think it's a time period where people want to tune out of schools during the summer. I mean, I think it's hard to engage
Right.
people in July.
right,
Um,
right.
even June, I think, but I think you've hit August, everyone's thinking school start.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah. So, but good question. I mean, those are the kind of details that we'll need to figure out. So with that, what I'll do here, I'm gonna jump back here. So that's the forecast projection. Any other questions with that? And we'll come back to it and play with that, but that's what that is. So I know we want to take a look at Fund 80. So what I put together here, and the first thing I'm going to share with you is there's an information sheet the DPI has on what is Fund 80 and what can be funded through that, what can't. And the general rule of thumb is it needs to be community-based activities. So we can't necessarily, charge our science program or our music program, those kind of things that typically would happen in a school setting. But there are some rules that need to be followed. So I just kind of linked this here. And of course, it talks about activities, adult education, community rec programs, evening swimming, pool operations, softball league, elderly food service program we don't do, but that's an option that we could provide as well. Preschool, other daycare services.
I'm sorry, Bill, back up a second.
Yeah.
Why would that be employed in the school program? I mean, I get it because we're looking at it as a community-based activity.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah,
this is where I think people need to shift their paradigm as to what Fund 80 is.
Yeah.
Fund 80 is a tax levying authority that is given to the school district to serve the community, because it's the only tax levy authority which hits everybody within a school district community. And so, for example, the city parks and recs program, the city taxpayers pay that. Not all of the townships, not all those people. And so it's the only taxing authority that equally hits everybody within that school district boundary, which is really the community within that area. And so it has nothing to do with it being a school program. That's the whole purpose of Fund 80. It's non-school programs. So it's that authority to serve the community at large, which lies within that district, if that makes sense. And that's where I hear people, oh, well, that's not a school program. No kidding. That's why it's in Fund 80. It's a community-based service. And that's what it's established for. That's the only thing it can be used for is community-based. He mentioned like you can't do science, but you could do a community-wide after-school science program, which is open to, all kids 14 and under, whether they're homeschooled or in private school or anything like that.
I know I've had people come to me and say, well, why can't, if we have a grant writer, which I understand this is what people are saying to me, not what I agree with.
Why isn't the city?
Why isn't the city paying for their portion and the chamber? And I said, well, number one, it's just shifting. It's still, the taxpayer is still gonna pay for it. It's just shifting from whether or not it's on our.
The residents of the city of Elkhorn are paying their percent
Yes.
of that grant writer position already.
Correct.
And if you were to take that then and say, okay, well, now we want the city of Elkhorn to also pay, then they would be paying significantly more, the
Correct.
city of Elkhorn taxpayers on that. And she does serve and work with groups all throughout the entire
Absolutely.
district.
Oh, yeah.
So that's why you would be double hitting the
Yep.
taxpayer in Elkhorn.
Yep.
If you were then to go and tell the city, well, we want you to also
Yep.
pay more.
Right. And then it doesn't cover, like, the chamber is a nonprofit. They're not a taxing authority, so.
Yeah, and the chamber also works with all the towns. It's like the school
Correct.
district
Mhm.
region that they're working with business owners, and she's helped write and consult on grants
Absolutely.
outside of the city for some of the
Absolutely.
businesses. Yeah.
So this chart doesn't necessarily show it, but if you figure the percentages, I think the city is about 34% of the overall levy, and then that's followed by LaGrange, Sugar Creek. I always call it the big three or big four, because that's pretty much,
Well, LaGrange is really high. I didn't. That must be LaGrange covers most of
Lauderdale Lakes.
Yep.
Mhm. Yeah, and then Sugar Creek's a big area, because 95% of Sugar Creek is Elkhorn schools.
That's a great question though, Julia, because, and then a lot of the work that she is doing, like the $3 million that she got from the feds, I mean, the school district, we're the largest consumer of water and sewage in the city.
Yeah.
So that savings on the city for the future water bills also benefits the district of all.
Comes back around.
Yeah.
Let's see here. So if you look at the, I'm gonna start with the expense, and we jump back up to revenues, but just to give you a sense, the programs we have, there's the Community Connection Program, so that's about 5 or 6 publications that we send out to the entire community. Our Parent Connection Program. Facility use chargeback, so that's basically Fund 10 charging Fund 80 for the use of our facilities.
Yeah.
And that's a revenue side offset, so there's really no net cost here.
Yeah.
Fitness center supervision, community engagement coordinator, which includes, so that would be like John's position, some administrative support, and then half of our weekend custodian that we hired a few years ago. So that would be included with that. The cost for community education programs, the community resilience program. Then we have the powerlifting, youth powerlifting, youth football, youth cheer, and then the community grant writer. So that gives you kind of a sense of the expenses. And then on the revenue side, again, facility use, youth football, there's some fees that get collected there, fitness center, community education fees, and then the balance is our annual levy for Fund 80. So, and if you look across the state, I don't know if there's a rule of thumb, and a lot of communities don't have any other rec program other than through the school district. So it just depends on your community to a certain extent.
So yeah, so the school district uses Fund 80 to run the parks and Rec. The community.
Was there more detail or anything? Does this give you at least a sense of what is operating within Fund 80? I'm assuming all of you know what these programs are, so that kind of gives you a sense.
Now, we did experience some savings in the Fund 10, like youth football used to be middle school football, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. So that was part of our general Fund 10 program. Now it's covered through the Fund 80. So our Fund 10 expense went away from that, but we were able to use Fund 80 to cover that piece. There are some districts that they don't do, that they'll run their entire up through 8th grade through that community service portion in that aspect. The only difference is then it's not a scholastic sport, it's a community-based one. And that may be problematic in our area where you're playing against the school teams, and I don't know how they would feel about that. But football, it wasn't a problem because in our region, none of the other schools have a school-based football. It was club groups.
So unless there's more questions with that, I'm going to move on to some of the reduction revenue ideas that we've come up with, and I can share with you. This is still a work in progress, but it's probably more of an update than anything. So we've identified, at least a dozen items ranging from, we've met with the bus company and looking at contracting at least 2 routes. Kind of gave them that directive, so they're coming back. I think early June we have a meeting to see what that would look like. When they shared with Jason and I, the riding membership and such on some of the buses, there certainly seems to be some room for efficiencies. Would that be a fair assessment, Jason?
Yeah, I think it could be more than 2 routes. I think it could be 3 or more. The ridership is pretty low, and there's a lot of, I would say, inequity in the bus route times. They haven't smoothed them. Where some buses are running 34-minute routes, and others, most of them are 35 minutes or less, and some are 48, 50 minutes. And they all should be smooth and all probably around the 50-minute range. So I think there's opportunity there.
We're looking, and we continue, I work with Nick, our buildings and ground supervisor, as we have vacant full-time positions. We're filling more of those with part-time positions, and we save on benefits. This is cost saving, really what it comes down to. We talked about instructional minutes. That was one of the recommendations. There may be some savings there depending on what we do. I think the original thought was actually if we reduce contracts, and I don't think anyone ultimately wanted to do that, but that's probably where you can see your biggest savings. But next year's contract or school days does go down from 171 to 169, so there could be some utilities, maybe some transportation savings just by having 2 fewer student contact days next year.
But we're maintaining the same number of minutes.
Well, no, I think the minutes would be going down a little bit.
Okay.
It'd have to be.
I think the contact days next year, I don't think the contact days shifted next year, though.
Wasn't
That was if we reduced the last 4 days in
You might be
June
right.
for the
Yeah.
training.
Right.
We could
Wasn't that
reduce
primarily
those
at
by
the-
4 days.
Wasn't
Yeah,
it
was
primarily at
just
the
how-
elementary?
yeah.
Yeah.
This year's calendar is 171 instructional days. And then next year, 169.
Go back to the,
Other
what's
one?
the in-service, yeah.
Sorry, pull both of them up.
Let's scroll down. 1152. So next year's, it was in-service workdays was 11 and teacher flex time is 5.
Yeah,
And 2, okay.
yeah. So the
So
mix
there's 2 less
changes.
instructional.
Yeah.
days, okay.
Still
How
on
did those,
187.
why did those change? The instructional or the in-service and teacher flex time? Why does it
To be
go up
frank,
one?
that was 2 years ago. I don't recall off the top of my head. 2 years ago, why we set that to be honest. I don't know if it was just because of the date when the calendar fell. I don't know.
So if the instructional days go up and the in-service days go up and the flex time days go up.
No, instructional days went down
Went
and
down,
in-service day went
So it's
up
the
and
same
flex
days,
time day
yeah.
went up. The
Yeah.
2-day bill is right. There's 2 less instructional days
And there's one more
and
day.
2 more teacher contract
This
days.
this was 10 and this was 4, I think, next year. Yeah. So there, I mean, there could be some impact there. I mean, our school year support staff usually are contracted for a certain number of days, so if those are reduced, technically, that could affect some savings, so. So anyway, that's why I have a to be determined there. I think I got 2 copies.
I mean, that is something, if we are going to, if the board is interested, can you go back to that calendar, Bill, the
Yeah.
last thing you had? If the board is interested in ending after, basically the 28th being the last day and reducing the time, we would need to increase the minutes slightly per day to have enough minutes in the year in light of having 2 less contract days. When we looked at that, the bus savings would be roughly $45,000. It's not a huge savings if you're keeping the employees full, if you're not reducing their compensation because of the reduction in contract days. But that was one of the areas that people on the ad hoc committee really pushed. Well, why do you have extra days if you're going to be at school? That's a no-brainer. Cut was the opinion shared by some.
We've had some discussions about maybe more of a transfer of a position, and that would be sent to Holmes' position, going to CCA, which would result in a reduction, I guess, in Fund 80 in terms of the position in that fund. Still retain the same individual. We have a couple, at least that I know of, 8 positions that will be retiring. So if we don't fill those positions, that's where the attrition model comes in. Professional staff, we've identified about 3 positions. Right today, I don't know if we have those 3 through attrition. I think we know we have 1, possibly others. But some of that is still going through the process of filling some of our vacancies to see where people land and how that all shakes out. So I think that's to be determined.
Now,
Go
when
ahead.
it says may increase class size, it will increase class size.
Yeah.
Just
So,
so we're clear.
so we would have to change because there's a policy about how many kids per class.
No, so
No.
so what the policy
25 kids per
is,
K through 5.
there is a policy related to the number of kids in class, but what it's actually related to is when you can accept open enrolled kids or not. And so what it says is, it gives grade level spans and a certain number of students, and if you're at that number of students, then you can't accept or place open enrolled students in that section or that class. The difficult with the way we're set up is, let's say that we have a grade level, because we're not center schools, I'm not saying we should be, it's just the challenge. If we have a grade level that has 4 sections of 20 students, which, that's gonna be 80, and then we eliminate one of them, then we have to disperse those 20 students, so it's gonna push each of those classes up to, 7 plus 6 in that scenario. So you're going from class sizes of 20 to 27 in a scenario like that. So it's not like, oh, we're just increasing 1 or 2 students per class, because it's only the 4. If you were center schools and you had 10 sections of 20, that's not nearly as big a deal, because then you are impacting the classes by 2 students, spreading it across, smoothing it across. So it will impact, and significantly, when I say significantly, by 5+ students in an elementary classroom, when you collapse a section almost. Because we have very few sections that have 4. We're down to a lot of 3 sections, and that even compounds it worse. You go from 3 to 2 if you do. So it does impact that process. And it's more challenging, but where we have the declining enrollment, we don't have declining enrollment at our other grade levels, we have it at the elementary level. So that's where, when you're looking at the attrition, that's where those enrollment numbers are down. But, yeah.
We built in here potential consolidation of administrative position with Sarah Stone, retiring at options. The assumption is we fill that internally, basically, somehow. So that would be a savings there. Optimistically, we'd have a few more students in open enrollment. So that's, we just included 10 students basically. But again, as we move forward, open enrollment period's open. The alternative will open again in July and look more and more information.
For years, we averaged 50 or more. If we do a look back, it's around that number. But more recently, I believe the year before last was last year 9, or the year before last was 9.
Last year was 9.
And then the year before that was 72. So that's kind of a volatile number on that net open enrollment. It could, I think 50 is an achievable mark, but anywhere from 10 to 50, and that's something we can use on. I think 10 is a very conservative mark, but we have a lot of open enrolled kids who graduate and leave on year. So we have a lot of backfilling to do on open enrollment. So just to get to net 10, we typically need to add like 110 open enrolled kids to backfill what we have in the normal shift.
And I know in the ad hoc committee, it was suggested to promote a little bit more of the options program to maybe bring in more open enrollment, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, so, and with that, we've been working close with them. We've written a charter school expansion grant, which would give a lot more resources for that, which really has to be used for the advertising and marketing. We have scheduled a flyer. Racine closed the virtual school, the virtual program. And so we have a flyer that is sent to the Racine School District area for all kids school age. And just to give you an idea, just that one targeted print piece costs about $5,000 to print and mail to the addresses in that area. So the marketing does cost, but if we get one lead from that, it pays for itself. So I'm pretty confident we have a good opportunity there, but,
That was K, see,
K-12,
the high school program's going to.
the virtual program. Yeah, they decided to discontinue that for whatever reason.
Is there any concern about the impact of the lawsuit that's going on and how that may be a deterrent? I gotta address the elephant in the room, I'm sorry. I don't know, I don't know, and we may not have an answer to that, and I
I've
respect and
had
understand that.
2 or 3 families that have reached out that did say, I had one just this weekend. Because the injunction paperwork was filed and I think jumped to the conclusion that the court granted the injunction. And
I know that there were parents that kept their kids home from school today, just so you know.
Yeah, we may lose some from that avenue. But then again, we've had to turn away families from the Whitewater area because we didn't have room in Tibbetts, and that's where they wanted to go for open enrollment. So, I don't know, that may fill back up because they tend to be in that northern part of the district where the ones that I'm hearing from. I certainly hope that people wouldn't jump to that sort of conclusion or harsh reaction, but so in short, yes, that could have a negative impact. But if they think it's,
I think it's a deal and all, and I get it, but it's just, it's conversations and questions that have come up, and it's an active discussion in the community. So,
good.
Next item, we were going to adjust consumable fees. I think it's $25 a student. We did that by $5. It doesn't generate, it doesn't balance the budget.
It's something.
It's something. So,
Sorry, what is that?
we do, for students, we have an annual consumable fee.
Yeah.
So that's when they do their registration. You may have seen that with the kids, that there's a registration
Okay.
fee that they pay. Yeah. We call it a consumable fee because we can charge for consumable items. We can't charge for like staff or
Right.
that kind of thing. So there's limitations.
Yeah.
On what you can do here.
Paper or
Right.
agendas.
So, I know when I participated in surveys in the past, our fees are pretty low relative to what, especially as you head towards the Milwaukee area, but.
It seems like it's been $25 for a
I was just gonna say,
Yeah.
it is $25 for my kid for his school.
And I think that increased from like 15 to 25 or something.
Because I have 5 kids, I'm really opposed to it.
Is it,
I don't know, just philosophically, I believe it's supposed to be a free and appropriate public education. I don't like, in all transfer, I'm not a big fan of fees. And, just last year, I was in Walmart walking with, and I know it was one of our parents, because they had the little Walmart class supply list, and the little kid was all excited to get their class supplies. And the mom was there with the kid, and the dad goes, I can't believe we have to pay all this effing money to go to public school. I thought this was public school and free. And I know it's because they are paying, and we try to be judicious with their own personal supplies, but it runs about $100 a kid when you go with the parent to get the kids. So you're paying the fees to start the year, then about $100 per kid on your school supply. It's hard on them.
But yes, I agree with that, but then you have, how many of our school families are renters versus, if you're a renter, you're not paying anything.
So you're paying the tax that the landlord.
Yes, pay your rent.
Well,
Yeah.
yes.
In a roundabout.
But
Well,
in
it's
a
not a good
roundabout
landlord
way.
if they're not covering the tax.
Yeah, in a roundabout way you are, but
So, again.
No, but that's just my opinion. The board is your prerogative. The board can do whatever we want with fees. I just.
We need to combine, if you have, one child enrolling, it's X, two children, 3 children,
And
So,
I can guarantee you, the landlords are raising their rents much faster than tax rates are going up.
yeah.
supply and
So it's
demand.
not all just,
oh, yeah.
No, they're definitely covering their tax.
oh, yes,
Oh, yeah.
and then some.
if we were to freeze some of the budget categories, which is basically supplies and equipment that goes into 3% in the model, so if we went back to status quo, that's $60,000. We had a one-time savings, because remember, this year we added the lacrosse program, and there was one-time cost with that, so we don't really need to continue with that budget piece. So if that's backed out, I originally had 5% in for electrical and gas. Certainly rates are going up. But as we're trying to manage using that data wrangler in terms of managing our peak use of electric, Nick and I are talking, we're feeling confident that we won't need to increase those two categories. So we'll see savings enough to offset the rate increases. That's our goal right now.
Fantastic.
So if we can do that, we see some savings there. Also, there's been some discussions Jason's had with our school nurse about maybe, providing some of that back end community county health services. The details I think still need to be worked out, but we just listed it there as an item that would have effect at least a reduction in Fund 10. And then we talked about the health insurance, so it is got to be determined. So if we do those things, dollars and cent wise, we're at 942 of our 1.2 million. So, if that becomes the goal, we're not quite there yet, but we've identified some things. Yeah. And again, I think from a staffing standpoint, I think a month from now, I think we'll have some more clarity on some of this and where people are at in terms of positions. Part of this, and I put this in here, and I wanted to kind of run this by the board, but if we go to referendum in November, and if that is not successful, by that time in the school year, we've already made all of our commitments to staffing. Because contracts have been, all of that has been decided.
Yeah.
So we started to identify a few areas we could potentially hold on until after a November referendum, just to give us some cushion.
Sure.
So those include, and again, this originally was looking at modifying the compensation adjustment. The board may decide we don't want to do that. We want to give maybe 4.1%. The Chromebook replacement, we usually do 3 grades a year. If we were to hold on that, as I've talked with Mr. Dricken, he's already ordered enough computers to supply most of the second graders next year, plus the seniors will have their computers. He's bought different motherboards and updated some of those. We could probably get by starting the school year. As we look at our annual maintenance budget, we've done a lot this year with our roofs, with our HVAC. If we had to wait until we know what the final referendum was, we could probably get by certainly for a year if we had to. This would not be a long-term solution. I don't think the district business will catch up with us.
No, it's just a way to balance the budget.
It's the balance of budget, give us that, it's continued. We just hold on these things until we knew.
Yeah.
And then if there are any other staff positions. So it doesn't equal the 1.8, but it's again, looking at what things could we do at that junction. And that's the negative with the November referendum is pretty much committed to everything else.
Yeah.
So.
But I also don't think we were in any position to try and push something through this spring.
Correct.
That would have been a disaster.
No, I don't disagree. I think the fall timeline will be much better. I really do think if we set up and as we look at this options structure, I think we can hit that target 50, if not by the fall, by that winter number. With a targeted focus, we need to improve our website. There needs to be, I think, a little bit more staffing support so that they can handle it. Right now, the high school ratio, which that's the area that we would target the most, is the high school level. But our high school staffing ratio is about 40 plus students to one teacher, which is about their max that they can handle. So I think we may need to make a short-term investment to have the infrastructure there that they can grow rapidly, because I don't want to put out, say for example, I get the directory list for a virtual school that has several thousand students. I don't wanna put a message out to them
Right.
and not have the internal
Oh,
capacity
yeah.
ready to handle 10% of those calls.
Yeah.
Cause I really think that what we offer and with that Gateway Edge program,
Yep.
it's not unrealistic to think that 1 in 10
Yeah.
of already virtual students would have interest in exploring that program.
Yep.
And I can't have them call and delay on response, and that infrastructure has to be
Yeah.
ready to go
Yep.
before we do that push out.
Mhm.
And we can get that directory data for those students. Then we're not making a blind push to like all the districts that we're seeing. It's doing a targeted push to families that have already made that choice to the virtual school. If that makes sense.
So, Bill, you mentioned, on the professional staff, teacher contracts. Is it possible to have a contract that says, hey, it's 1.5%? And if the referendum passes, it's 4.2%. Is it legal?
I don't know how you word it in the contract itself, but certainly could be part of a communication so that staff understood what the goals were. Because I don't know how you put in the contract, the
Yeah.
commitment without committing.
Right,
Does that
because they're
make
gonna be getting
Well,
paychecks based on
Well, it's going to be
something.
contingent on referendum passing, their salaries would increase upon the referendum passing. And
I've seen districts put in language in the referendum question or the explanation is for staff compensation to retain. Yeah, I think you could do what you're asking, and I don't know if it's good.
Yeah,
Just reflecting on that ad hoc committee, there were some that were like, oh, well, your hands in the, you're just wanting this, or you just support this because your hands in the honey pot, as some say.
yes, of course, yes. I know. Well, the whole thing about it is if we give them 1.5% or 4.1%, the knowers are going to say you should give them 0. You know, and so I'm talking out loud here so we can, as a group, kind of say, well, is it better just to give them 4.1%, then we're going to sell it, you know? And that's what we're focused on versus what I just described to you, which is, what does that mean? You know, and as Julia said, it's better to say, okay, it's going to cost you one, a 2-person meal once per year. I think we can stomach up to it. And that's how we sold the last big one. And that was an easy sell, and we got over it that days. So simpler, more successful. So having said all that,
yeah, you just have to bring it down to terms that everybody can understand.
and for me, it's you gotta start getting these people back up to where they need to be competitive. Otherwise, we're gonna start losing great quality staff that we have, and that's really that's just not a loss that I want us to go through.
I mean, we talk about how far behind the district is in terms of, per pupil funding. But when you start adding in all of the wages that we haven't increased for our teachers, how far are they behind on their payroll, on their pay scale? Not keeping up with inflation. And that's what concerns me.
And the comment about the wages benefiting them more towards retirement is an important observation.
I agree. That's a great point.
Because insurance is just going to continue to crawl up until something changes, but probably not in our teachers' lifetime. Unfortunately, maybe their kids. But
I have seen there are creative ways to do the compensation increase. I think, Bill, you factored to move everybody on the salary schedule is typically around
1.4, 1.5.
1.5%. The other option is it could be, everybody moves on the lane and then, everyone who, I've seen area districts do a retention bonus, or you don't call it a bonus, or retention compensation where it's a flat dollar amount.
Yeah.
So everybody moves on the schedule, and then everybody who reports on day 1, you get the whatever, $1,500 or $2,000 bump, whatever that difference is. I don't think it would be that much to be 4.1%, but I tried to hire other teachers from other districts. I've been turned down a couple. I was surprised. We're like, well, no, if I go back to my district, I get an extra 2,000.
Yeah.
So it was
Yeah.
motivating to them in that fashion or for that aspect. But I would want it on their base so that it counts towards their compensation. But you can also do it not on the base, so you don't have that long term. You could then see how the referendum goes and not be locked into that 4.1% long term. If you did like the movement on the schedule would be roughly 1.5%, and then everybody has a retention bonus. Then if the referendum goes, you could lock it in as part of the base salary, or if it doesn't pass, it doesn't go on the base. If that makes sense.
I think the compensation, overall compensation from a salary standpoint is what matters to them. And they're looking to be competitive with their peers. So how will we get there? I think we can be straightforward with it. Something helps us to disguise it much.
Well, and something else that our staff are going to fill next year is because the vast majority of them are going to choose 24 pay periods instead of 21.
Yeah.
So their actual paycheck is going down.
But they're gonna have funding through the summer months.
They will.
But still, it doesn't matter.
I get it, because people live in a monthly, on a monthly budget.
They do. That's another reason why perhaps front loading, I don't know what that does on a cash flow basis, but perhaps front loading the retention piece and then getting it in a chunk that might, I don't know, you feel that or see that. It's just some thought.
I like that retention.
Is there anything that we talked about here, either we're not on the right track, or there's some things you just have some concerns about, and this is a working document at this point, but curious, I guess, if there's any reaction at all.
I guess I have a little question on what does that look like, providing the countywide health services by our school nurse?
So I'll go back and explain. So that's a lot of what CENTA does in that community resiliency position is work that falls under the umbrella of a school nurse and what they're trained for, that public health, that general public health type service.
Okay.
And so you could utilize it, and I did talk with CENTA. I don't like, I mean, that position was created for a reason. I like that it's there. I would prefer that stay there. It doesn't help our general operation to ship that. It does lower the fund $80 amount. And CENTA would be great over in that other position, but it does take away that certain level of services. But Mary is a trained school nurse in that public area. She could assume some of that role, and we could still utilize CENTA for part of the time as well, because CENTA's made a lot of network connections and works with a lot of groups and organizations throughout the community as well. So by doing that, the percent of Mary's job that would be covering the public health piece, that could be covered by Fund 80, not Fund 10. So you would have savings. Right now, all of Mary's contract is Fund 10. So if 20% of it is public health or 30%, then that percent of her salary would be covered by Fund 80. And you would get that savings, $30,000 savings or whatever from the Fund 10.
Okay.
And CENTA's preference would be to stay in rural. She left a similar type position of what she'd be doing with CCA. That's kind of what she was doing at Whitewater. That's where she would be a good fit at. But she left that position to come and do this more public health type role.
Did she express interest in filling that position?
No, that is just conversation that we have, that depending on what the board decides to do with that, because there has been pressure and individuals that They said, well, that they target funding. I think part of it is a lack of understanding of it, but to be frank, there's others
It is a lot.
that they don't like the idea of community health program. I had one parent who told me in a meeting that, her position was created to hopefully help minimize and create greater awareness of suicide prevention and drug addiction recovery programs and so forth, which were lacking in the area. And it was on the heels of, it was after a death of one of our students a few years ago. And there is a coalition, a significant group that we have not heard from, that if we do shift her and we eliminate that position, we will hear from that group. And they're not aware of that yet. They're not really aware that it's being considered, but we will hear from them. They are very vocal. So I do anticipate that. I want to be transparent with that. We've heard from an anti-type public health type group on that, where one parent literally told me, well, it's not the district's job to prevent suicide. That's a parent's job. And, yeah, it's sad when someone dies, but, I've been suicidal myself. You are cool. Just say that's the level at which there's the indifference towards that sort of thing. So there's not going to be any swaying or convincing otherwise, but that's where the not supportive of that type program is. They just feel, again, they're associating with, well, the school shouldn't be involved in that. No, it's a funding mechanism for the community as a whole, and Waller County suicide rate is pretty high. And we found that there wasn't a lot of, services there.
What year did Census start in that position?
Isn't it 4 or 5 years ago?
Maybe 4.
Yeah.
And her first year, she really didn't get rolling because we entered the pandemic, and she filled a role of, she does a lot of things that people don't see. Like, she was doing the phone call follow-ups and making sure, hey, you're on quarantine, are you getting the work you need? Or what can we do as a district to help you? And so she was doing all those phone calls behind the scenes with the families. I think that's part of our strategy, really helped us stay on our feet throughout it. When we had the bus accident, for example, she's the one who followed up with every family. Here's the insurance information. Is your kid okay? Is there anything you need from the school district? Almost like another social worker, to be frank. That's really how I look at that position. She's working like a social worker with them, but not a licensed social worker. So I just wanted to be transparent. I don't want you to be surprised that if we do make that shift, wait a second, she has a whole coalition that sets up booths, that works at the different events that meet on a monthly basis, and we plan events. And
the food backpack.
get to the word, the food in the backpack.
Refresh my memory, what would she be doing at CCA? What's the shift?
Well, it's advising, making sure the students have the classes they need with Gateway and the structure they're staying on top of their work, kind of that quasi administrative assistant and student services type of work. And it doesn't have to be Cynthia. I mean, anybody else could do that. But if the board wanted to shift that over, that would be, that would be the potential solution. My concern with the addiction recovery piece, Cynthia is the one who, she has all the training, the background, set the program up for that. How much time or bandwidth is that?
So then, moving on, referendum results, again, it is what it is, about 61%.
Yeah, I didn't pay attention to the local referendums that were going on to see what passed, what didn't.
Yeah, so locally we had Walworth passed,
Williams Bay passed,
Lake Geneva Badger and Lake Geneva Joint One did not.
and the Guanacos went down, but theirs was a capital project for the middle school.
Oh, yeah, Milwaukee did not.
It was 102 million.
Yeah, it was a lot.
Parkview is a old staff building.
And theirs did not go through. Right?
Correct. So, anyway.
And they're paying on a pretty decent capital project with the high school renovation.
Yeah, a few years
right?
ago, not that long ago.
It is.
Although their middle school, if you see, and their middle school probably does need
It-
something.
I worked with them. Yeah.
So,
Which is It needs some help.
But anyway, but you can see the percentages, reoccurring referendums, approval was, 55%, non-reoccurring 62, and then the ones that dealt with debt issue was 63. And that,
Is 61%, a higher percentage than we've seen recently?
no,
Okay,
It's lower.
oh, it is.
yeah. And what's interesting here, the Wisconsin Policy Forum did, this is kind of a neat little article they put together. But there was a chart here I thought was really telling. It compares, going back to 2001, the number of operational referendums compared to capital. And if you look at how that has changed the last
Yeah.
couple of years. And my guess is for a number of districts, they have capital needs, but they probably feel the operational they need to get, it's a higher priority at the moment. So,
So put it off and it spikes and.
all right, so anyway, I
Well,
like,
can you scroll up? That's,
yeah,
okay, that's interesting. So that says how many operational referendums it passed? No, that's how many passed in the last decade.
so it's a nice article they put together, I thought. We put together an article on school finance that you'll see in the community connection. Again, this is probably part of that. So, and we show kind of our spending compared to the statewide, what makes up our budget, and it's a lot of it's a recap of the work the Financial Stability Committee did. So we, listed the members there, talked about the process they went through, what we were facing, and a lot of the history in the state, their recommendations, and where you can go for more information. So hopefully it starts engaging people a little bit in terms of the process. So it's just a recap. So I think that'll come out next week. And this is the rest of the community connection.
Does the article talk about us cutting the 1.2?
Yeah, it basically, right here.
Okay,
Yeah, so kind of the 4 recommendations that the committee had are bullet point
Okay.
here.
okay,
And then I think if we've got the IQ scan thing there, they can look at the entire report if they want to.
got it.
So it's available to the public.
And in there, they're saying a non-recurring. You see
Um,
that, Robert?
I think Tyler.
The recommendation of the committee was recurring. Yeah.
Can you put their scan thing right on there for the first one?
Yeah, exactly.
So the next thing, community survey. So this is a draft. If we wanted to do a community survey, and a lot of the narrative comes from the community connection article that I just shared with you. Go ahead, Jason.
Yeah, let me give a little intro. So, we've used school perceptions in the past to do a survey.
Yeah.
And one of the things when we did the survey prior to going to the first of the 2 larger referendums years ago. And what we learned from school perceptions is a significant component of the survey is to educate the community. That's where regarding what you're asking them to respond to. And so if we are, I'm not necessarily a huge fan of doing a survey. I feel that we put out the calls with the ad hoc committee. We asked them to give their feedback. We did a large cross section of the community on that, and they gave a recommendation there. But I took the approach modeled after what School Perceptions does and utilizing this to create another education opportunity. And so it's wordy, which if you look at other examples of school perception surveys, they generally are, because you want them to understand the issue that they're going to respond to. But you only have a certain amount of area. So we did put down a link to the ad hoc committee presentation on this. If the board wanted to survey, and my feelings, just because we put it together, my feelings will not be hurt if you decide that, yeah, we don't necessarily need to do the survey. But then go ahead and and we would take this and put this into a survey application. And it talks about school funding explained, again, some of that same language. I go back up though, Bill, because I wanted to show, down, there's also embedded in here a hyperlink, because Julia, you mentioned this. Click on this is to the document of the history of our savings that we've done.
Yeah.
Since 2014, 15.
Yeah, that's good.
So you can go back and look at that. Again, I think people need to really understand, because there's a lack of understanding that the reason why we're short funds is because of a lack of the state keeping up with funding in line with inflation.
Right.
Not because of mismanagement. We've balanced our budget for over a decade and grown the fund balance and done all that. It's just everybody's getting a shortfall. So that gets down to the two questions. I worded one because I saw a lot of pushback on social media and so forth, even related to the cuts that the ad hoc committee recommended. I think it's a lot of ignorance around that, not realizing that no, our shortfall is not 1.25 million. Our shortfall next year is 4 million.
Yeah.
1.25 million is just a component of it, but I saw a lot of pushback around the district even cutting 1.25 million. So I felt that if we don't ask that question to the general community, would you support a referendum for a higher amount than what the ad hoc committee recommended if it prevented the district from having to go to make further cuts to staffing and educational services? I think if we don't ask that question, those individuals are going to be met.
Yep.
Just like I'll hear from time to time, you know, we should have all the buildings air conditioned. I don't disagree, that'd be very nice. But that, when we surveyed and asked the community, that wasn't supported.
That wasn't a priority.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know, maybe you would be surprised and there would be an overwhelming support amount come back on that. I don't think so. I think the ad hoc committee's work was well done. I think it represented a good cross-section of the community, and I think that is probably where the community may fall more so. I mean, I would love not to have to cut 1.25 million. I feel we've already been cutting for over a decade.
Right.
Actually 1.75, because that's still $500,000 we have to come up with next year.
Right.
And like I showed in that example on the class size reduction, it's at least one grade level at each building is going to get hit.
Yep.
4 to 5 to 6, 7 students per class.
Yeah, I've talked to several teachers who teach outside of our district and have talked to them about, you know, their class sizes and what are they managing. And they're telling me, you know, they've got 25 kindergartners, and I'm like, what's that like, trying to manage 25 kindergartners? They're all like, it's a nightmare.
Hurting fleas.
They said it's an absolute nightmare.
And our teachers are already asked to do so much.
Yeah.
It is. And is there a huge impact on student achievement? So the data would show, no, there's a minimal impact. It's not the most effective strategy. But on teacher sanity, retention, and wanting to stay in the workplace, that does have a big impact.
Yes, it does.
So,
yeah.
And then the other question is, how do you feel about the ad hoc committee's recommendation?
Have you ever done a survey before?
We did, but on the capital referendum.
Yeah, that was when we did.
Because we haven't had an operational one. We did one on the capital referendum, and that's kind of what guided the decision and on doing that and into what tax level we could do. Now, we didn't put questions worded in here that spell out the tax impact. You know, and what that is. I mean, that is, if we want to get more sophisticated, we could put in the language that would, oh, there it is right there. Okay. But we could put that language right into the question.
That might be helpful.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think because
Because
people,
that way they can see the one-to-one relationship
well,
of,
and not only that, but I mean, if they're at a time crunch, they're not gonna click on a bunch of links, they're gonna
Yeah.
jump to the question.
right, right.
Yeah.
So,
And
I agree.
I'm confused by the last line in the second question. For a total increase of the revenue limit of $7 million a year.
Yeah,
That,
From 20, that means forever. That means.
but I think it needs to be reworded.
I think it needs to be
Yeah, it
reworded
definitely
because
needs
they're
to be
gonna say 1.7, 1.7, 1.8, 1.8, okay, 7. Why did you just increase this by, by
Yeah.
sixfold and from 2027 on? It's, again, it's all
Yeah,
about
it
the
needs to be
perception.
reworded.
Yeah, I think it needs to be reworded,
Good
especially
catch.
that last part.
The only reason why I did that, I don't disagree, that was, well, but that is
It's
the
alarming.
total dollar.
Right,
Again, I don't disagree about what it is, but presentation, perception, somebody's gonna look at it and say, are you crazy? You're gonna, add $7 million from 2027 ad infinitum, yeah.
I think one of the questions I've been tossing around my own head is what will be the value of the survey and how will the board use that information going forward?
Yeah, do we know the readership?
I think, that question there in particular, because really what that represents is that in 2027, the total increase is $7 million. And that's $7 million a year forever. And the whole thing about that is that nobody can comprehend that because the people that want to say no can easily spend that one however they want. But when we can tell them that all that's going to cost them is a dinner out one night a year, year number one, year number two, it's 2 nights.
Yeah.
Year number 3, it's 3 nights.
right.
And then it's 4 nights, that's 5 nights, and then it's whatever, 6 nights a year going forward.
Right.
I think somebody can understand what that means.
Right. Right.
But when I tell them I'm gonna raise it $7 million a year forever,
Right,
well,
Right.
what does that mean to me? It's not just you, it's our whole community
right.
Oh,
that's
yeah.
being taxed on this. And so when we deal in big numbers and a complicated statement like that,
Yep.
it does nothing to sell the story.
Right.
How would
I agree. That's what I
how
say.
would the referendum question have to be worded? On a capital project, we have to list the total.
Correct.
On a operational, I don't believe you do. But I think
No.
it would be wise to list it as it would appear on the ballot or similar,
Yeah.
if that makes sense.
Well, and it would
Yeah,
be
familiar
listed
language.
just like it is here, but it would end here.
I just know in the Burlington one, there were people that felt that the board wasn't being, or that the communication wasn't as transparent as what the total cost was going to be at the end of it. And then it left people to their own devices on calculating that total cost.
Yeah, you're got that to address as well, but
I don't disagree. I mean, it is a
so,
1.7, 1.7, 1.8, 1.8 is a lot more palatable.
right.
Okay.
So I guess that's what my question is do we have to say that it's ad infinitum? Because, in the next 4 to 5 years, we could have a different legislature, we could have a different governor, we could, there could be reforms that done
There
at
could.
the state level that would not require us to.
Well,
levy.
and all
Don't
this, and
require-
what this does, this is increasing the revenue limit.
Got it,
So that's the max the district can levy.
got it.
So it doesn't mean that a district has to levy to that amount
Right.
if there's
Well,
changes.
there's
I don't know if there will be,
Yeah.
but
The component that came up in another meeting recently about just decreasing enrollment, decreasing, population.
Well,
Because
that is
kids,
true.
because
Yes.
kids,
We
people
are-
are having kids and,
There are lots
so
of
how,
children
what's the,
being born.
what's the impact?
if, so what I'm hearing is don't put the 7 million at the end of on the first one, I think I would like the question more if we actually showed, if we built in what it would take to not make those cuts.
Yeah.
And then cost it out. If we go,
I'm sorry, yeah.
sorry to,
No, I was just trying to find language.
Yeah.
so if you pulled up it would be good to look at like Burlington's language that they had. But if you go back to the survey, would you support a referendum? So instead of saying at a dollar amount higher, if we spelled out, first year would have to be 2.95 million. And then the second year would have to be 495. If we're eliminating that $1.75 million cut.
Also, it would be a combination of those two, is what you're saying, yeah.
Does that make sense? to actually spell out what that cost would be and then spell out what it would
Not,
cost on the tax
not in
impact?
that format, maybe in a graph chart or something like that, but
Maybe,
Big numbers that people.
yeah,
I think,
Right.
I think we don't wanna overtly confuse people.
Yeah.
right,
I
right,
agree.
because they're gonna think of it as bait and switch.
You like the simplicity.
Yeah.
We wanna be very, I mean,
Smaller numbers, simple.
yep,
yeah,
we don't
Keep
keep
it
a
simple.
simple constant message,
agreed.
Mhm.
it's not gonna go to our favor.
Yeah, I like
And
the
we're
idea.
just gonna confuse everybody by
Yeah.
supplying them with more information. They don't wanna hear it. They
Do
don't wanna
we,
spend the time comprehending.
well, and that's my concern with,
That
my
was
concern
nice.
with that is, are they even gonna read it and comprehend before answering the question?
Well, that's what I think Julie had, if there's a way to put it in a graph form, you know. A, question one, this is what it would look like. This would be the referendum amount, this would be the expenditure, so on and so forth. B, I don't know.
How do these surveys go out? How do the community ones go out? Because the school ones go to the parents. How does the community survey go out?
Yeah, so there's a couple of ways we could do this. What my recommendation would be is just like the community connection goes to every household, that we send it to via like a community connection style with a QR code for them to go online and complete the survey.
So a printed
Yep.
email.
That's
Yeah.
Or they can fill it out when school perceptions did it, they could fill out the hard copy and turn it in.
Turn in
No.
So they have
The elderly are
online
not
or fill out the hard copy.
And turn it in, and then what they did is what we would have to do is have someone take the hard copies
And
and
And-
enter them in, so we have it in the book.
I'm curious what the.
Your dad is much more tech savvy than me, so.
No, he is not.
No, are you sending out the emails, or who did the website?
My mom.
Oh, okay. Well, your mom is.
Yeah, and my niece.
Okay.
They do everything.
Yeah, anybody over 80.
No, but they could do the hard copy and,
Right.
mail it in. School perceptions, I think, did a self-return envelope with all of them.
I think they did.
So, I mean, that's part of what you're paying, like
Right.
$25,000 or
Exactly.
something for the.
So I have a financial question. How much is it gonna cost to do that? And is it gonna be worth? Are we gonna get a return on it?
5,000.
Who's gonna fill these out?
Yeah.
Who's gonna take the time to do it?
What's our community connection cost per run?
It's probably 4,000 to 5,000.
Yeah, about 5,000.
Is it a back page tear off, fold it up, put it in the mail kind of thing?
Could design it like that.
Interesting.
I know school perceptions, when they did theirs, like for Lake Geneva, I think it was $99,800 is what they paid for them to do the survey.
I'm all for the surveys. I like surveys. But if we're gonna be spending all this money, and we're saying, hey, we're reducing money, but here's $5 grand to tell us if you want us to spend money or not.
Yeah.
I mean, does it change the calculus on what the board's decision is in building?
Great question.
Now, just to be devil's advocate, Lake Geneva, I talked to them, I talked to McGonagall, they did a survey, they did school perceptions, which are a professional survey, and they analyze all that. The results of the survey told them one thing, but the results of the referendum was something else.
Yeah, that's.
Because of who responded to the
So I
survey.
don't, you know,
Yeah.
So it's not, yeah, the response is not necessarily
Right.
indicative of the tax base.
yeah, and they were surprised because school perceptions has always prided themselves in having a good feel of the pulse of the community, and that didn't
I
work.
guess if we're using the survey just to validate whether or not we're gonna be supported in November, I don't see that that's good use of funds.
Or to what point?
I think it's a different picture. We were thinking it was like, sorry, but $130 a year,
Yeah,
doubling
yeah.
and tripling. We're less than half of that. That's
Yeah.
a different story.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
I agree.
It's a total different story.
Yeah,
itself.
that is true.
But if
Yeah, that is true. Part of the survey will be to tell the story
Educate.
and to educate. So that's a good point, Ed.
What were you saying, Kyle?
I was gonna say, this is your advertisement right there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're
Yeah.
using it to,
Yep,
whether they actually fill it out or not,
yep.
you're letting them know.
So
Yeah,
if we look at it like that, do we wanna highlight the,
I think you
that
can
last
just,
page, scroll up a little bit?
I think you can just use community connections again
Yeah,
and play up these are the more fine-tuned numbers and
Yeah.
This is what it's
That-
about.
That last sentence there,
Mhm.
make that, the- somehow marketing wise, just make that the.
Yeah,
advertising.
we haven't spruced up or bolded
Right.
any of
Yeah.
the different pieces.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's
We
our
could-
advertising.
It could be part here, part with the question
Yeah,
too.
make,
so-
make them statements rather than questions.
Yeah.
Now, from a cost standpoint, I mean, if this ends up being one of our community connections, and there's still a cost, but it wouldn't be an added cost.
Right.
You know, if we do 5 or 6 a year anyway, this would just become one of
This would
those.
be
Can't
one of
we,
them.
if we're doing this through a,
It is a
QR code.
Oh,
can't we just create our own Google?
no. you're right.
Yeah, oh, okay.
This is us doing ourselves.
Okay,
The
good.
5,000 is not using school perceptions,
Correct.
that's our mailing.
That's the
company.
mailing.
Yeah.
Got it,
And the printing.
got it. Okay.
And it might be less than that because it's gonna be less pages than.
Right.
I think it's important too, though, that we have it in there that as recommended by the ad hoc committee. I think it's important. that-
Yeah.
I think that's an excellent point,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
some members may say, well, geez, we spent all this time doing all this work to recommend to the board, now you're going out and surveying people. So
Yeah.
I think you-
Right, yeah.
It's more of an
That's good.
advertisement piece than
Yeah.
than a
Yeah.
survey.
Is there a different,
If
are
children
there
education
different?
besides endpoint.
Are we okay with those two questions with modifications to that? And what I'm hearing is kind of a general consensus, yeah, let's do a survey. Paper copy option return along with the completed online. And I think, does the board, I think, is that all right having the two questions? I don't see having only one question on it. But are there other questions that would be really pertinent, or does that overcome?
I think 2 questions is about all the attention span you get. Um,
And then from a time
So-
frame,
But like Kathy said, the last sentence on the bottom one,
Yeah.
yeah, that needs
Yeah,
to be
Yeah,
done.
you need to strike that.
That needs
but do you?
Go ahead
make it
and
clear
just
that
delete
they-
that.
That's forever then? That once that,
Either,
after
That's what-
4 years?
right,
That's
either,
what the ad hoc committee recommended.
Right, no, that's what I'm
Yeah.
saying, but to make that clear that this
So we put-
this is
It doesn't
recurring, not
end in
recurring.
2027.
Yeah, so we
right?
put,
Yeah,
would
that's
you support a recurring referendum?
Yes,
Mhm.
I think
Yeah.
it should say that.
And the
Yeah.
budget
For-
cuts of the ad hoc.
For
committee.
clarity's sake.
recurring might be, people are gonna, they're gonna want a sunset on it. Recurring, take out the OC.
Yeah.
There it is.
Not spell checking teams though, but oh my. Why is it, you can't spell?
What's your timeline with this?
I assume you would prefer to go out sooner than later.
Yeah.
So you have the results and give us time for everything.
Well, I think we want to get feedback on what,
July.
we just set out something in community connection.
Which
I
hasn't
think,
come back yet.
you know, we want to have that, have some time out there, so.
I think the end of May, the end of June, about a month.
Yeah.
That still gives lots of time to, you only need a couple weeks to get
Yeah.
the returns.
And then by the, annual meeting, we'll have a pretty good handle on
We'd
it.
have this by the second meeting in June.
Oh, that's a lot. Okay, I'll quickly go through this, not quickly, but I want to share with you, and I have prepared this, and this is really all looking at how do we offset the impact of a referendum and use the funds that have been accumulated in our debt service fund to pay off debt early. That's really what this comes down to. So what you see in numbers on this far left-hand side is our annual minimum debt obligations each fiscal year. So it's relatively consistent, a little over 4.2, 4.3 million until 2030, 31, and then it drops to 3.3. And then 2 years later, it's 1.9. And it's all based on the structure of our 3 debt issues that we have. So it's the 2016 referendum, or 15, 16, and 2020. That makes that up. And we usually try to structure our debt so that, and although this varied a little bit, is about every 5 to 7 years, there's a natural fall off in our debt. So if there's future needs for the district, you can look at addressing those needs without increasing the debt service levy potentially. That was always this kind of theory. So if we use some of the proceeds, and we have about $3.6 million in our debt service. So by utilizing those funds, we also then save in future interest payments for our taxpayers of about $500,000. So the 3.6 becomes 4.3. So then you see how our debt service would actually go down each year until, well, it goes down. It basically begins to be reduced, and then 1.9 for the last 4 years, and then we're debt free. To do that, what happens is we have some of our debt that we can simply is callable and just pay it off. And then we save the interest payment obligations as well. So that's where you get, here's the savings and interest. We have some of our debt that isn't callable yet. So what you do there is it's called a cash defeasance. And from a legal and from an obligation standpoint, you create basically an escrow account to pay off those obligations when they become due. And by doing that, we see a savings not only in the principal, but $485,000 in interest. So when you combine those two together, that's your $500,000 savings. I mean,
exactly.
For two reasons. Number one, we have the money in debt service. We should use it for debt service. Can't be used for anything else. And if we can save our taxpayers, why wouldn't we do this? The only negative that I can think of is more of the structure. And the structure is developed based upon a successful November referendum. If that didn't happen, we'd have to reapproach. We were already assuming we went forward with this before November. That's the assumption. Then we've already built in those savings. And whatever the referendum, if there's a future one after that, may not generate the same impact as what the November referendum would be. Does that make some sense? So I don't want to say it's a risk, but that's, once you do it.
But it's,
And it's due that we'd have to do it before knowing the outcome of the referendum.
Correct. I mean,
so we can.
The board could decide to wait and do it a year from now, but I think
then that would have a larger potential impact.
You're hedging your bet a little bit, but then you're also sitting on that money that's debt service and probably should get used at some point. The other nice thing now is that it can be set up in the escrow. The interest rates are pretty high for the escrow. That's what generates the savings for us. A year from now, maybe interest rates will fall, who knows? But
so is this going to be an action item in this?
it would be an action item. We'd have to go through a bunch of paperwork with Baird, but it could happen as early as June or July, depending on the wishes of the board.
Well, I think it shows that we're taking those, yes, we're hedging a bet here, but we're taking those recommendations from that ad hoc committee and we're putting them into action.
Right, and we're serious about it. We're looking to make actionable, action items.
That ad hoc is spent a lot of time, a lot of meetings.
Yep.
I just came from the food. Oh.
No. Wait, you're not supposed to say that out loud.
I'm recruiting them, Jason. Gotta get better food.
As we sit here and talk about saving taxpayers' money.
I think it's a potluck the next time.
Check with the charcuterie charcuterie that services gateway. Still on the drive.
I'm sensing board thinks we ought to proceed with this and start on this project.
I'm good with it. So,
well, you'll see at a future meeting that is actual resolution to proceed with this and go ahead and see what the savings actually is. I think everybody raised a great point. It's following through on kind of the recommendations.
Yeah.
That's a big.
We listened, we're acting,
So that's some good news tonight, I think. Resident cost per student, I'm going to quickly go over this, but I wanted to share with you, if I can find it quickly here. But you start looking at cost per student and where I want to avoid getting into deep discussions with people saying, well, you said the school district's cost per student is this number, but I went to this source and I found a different number. And I can tell you, there's enough sources out there, you're gonna get different numbers in different places, so.
And I want to share, we were at a conference that they did a cost per student report card, or it was all part of this report card. And they listed our total student count at 2,800 something, or wait a second, we're 3,500. Their divisor they used was off by 700.
What was that? What was the
I'll have to go fix that.
Yeah.
Yes,
Well,
that's
that's just
bad.
like the
The,
people
Will
that call us
school
up
board
and asking
never
for a cost per square foot.
Is that what it's called?
Every builder
And
calculates.
they were doing the same thing that, like, Delvin was upset about because they were pulling it from DPI sites that it didn't factor in the
Yeah.
computer.
So we use the, one of the things we do use is the Baird model, and they do a calculation. So this is looking at Fund 10 and 27. So in that one, almost all of them I've seen were on the low end. It's just the dollar amounts might be different. So if you look at Baird's model, this is our cost per student. If you go to the Wisconsin Policy Forum, which I like what they use because they based it on students that you're serving,
The actual head count.
the actual head count. So school district data. School district.
You will not find two sources that have the same number.
Right.
Yeah, so, so if you look at
That's what I was just
expenditures.
telling Heather. It's the same with people calling and asking what your cost per square
What
foot
is
is.
that?
It is,
for builders.
yes,
See,
it's a great
unless you have
analogy.
the exact same parameters, because every builder calculates their cost per square foot differently.
So, okay, well, this report says 13,223. And then the state is, what, 15,000. So that's that source. If you go to the DPI, you're gonna get another number, and they base theirs on what they call membership, which is not the students that you're actually serving, but the students that are residents of your school district.
So Delvin's divisor includes
All the
700 plus kids that aren't in the district.
Yeah.
Cool.
That's crazy.
So if you're ever in a community event where you hear that, or they say, oh, well, this number isn't right, I went to this source. It doesn't mean they're wrong or we're right or vice versa, it's just they're calculating it differently.
Yep.
And the key thing is that if you're looking at multiple school districts within a comparison, is that they're calculating it all the same way.
And it doesn't matter which model you use, we're always low.
We're
For
low in
amongst the
pretty
low.
much any model you look
Yeah.
at.
Certainly
So,
the lowest of the school districts in our.
Can you go back to Baird's? I
Yeah,
haven't
what
seen
was
those before.
Yeah. What did I
You're
do?
part of that.
Yeah. Right here.
What do you think we are percentage wise? Top or bottom, 5%?
Yeah, look at Delvin and Darien. See, that's why Jill flipped her gourd was when we shared, because they had passed that referendum
Yeah.
on the fact that, oh, our spending is lower than Elkhorn's, or we're so much lower. But that's when you divide by the actual number of students they serve.
Right.
Right.
And you could back out purchase services, which is kind of the open enrollment out number, plus any other things that are in purchase service. Now that changes their number.
Yeah.
See how that,
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Is-
Is what we are.
Is that just an open website? that anyone can-
the Baird one isn't, but the Wisconsin Policy Forum is. So this is an analytical we have with Baird. I use something called, Forecast 5, but I thought it became too expensive, so I just stopped using it. And then Baird came up with another model, it's less costly, so.
What did that back out? Purchase services?
Purchase services, but that would include so that would include, within that category would be the open enrollment out payments that you make.
Yeah.
But also, purchase services include a lot of special ed services, tuition, there's a whole bunch of things in purchase services, utilities, maintenance. So it isn't a clean thing that you can reduce all of that to show a comparison. And then Wisconsin DPI. Yeah. Has their have their own model, single year. School district.
That's 2 years old.
Yeah, see, their data isn't very current. So we pull Elkhorn, because that's statewide right there.
Right. No, no,
One down, right?
There you go.
So statewide is 16, and this chart we're at 14. So let me pull Delavan. They like this chart.
Again, that's per member, so that doesn't include 700 of our students. 600.
Yeah. So theirs here is 14.3, it's lower. But their membership shows this number. That's not the number of students they serve, just like our number is 3,000 and we're 3,500.
Yeah.
See how that?
Yep.
Can you change that? Is it an editable Excel?
Yeah.
You can put whatever you want in for membership.
Well, you can compare up to 8 school districts.
no,
No.
2014,
Can you
can you edit that?
Spreadsheet.
Can you change it to 3,500?
No,
No.
here, I don't believe so, but let's find out.
That'd be fun.
It's,
I don't think you can change that.
Probably not, but it'd be cool if it was.
yeah, because it looked like.
Yeah,
you
it did.
I might put 3,500.
Put 3,500 in there.
That's great.
6,000 better.
That's
Let's
good.
Okay.
So Jason, we just need 2,500 more
I'm
kids.
surprised. Yeah.
Yeah, well, maybe it's, yeah, it did
That's
say,
interesting.
There,
So what-
took a
what's
while.
Delavan's
Take
real
a
number?
while.
Yeah,
What's Sullivan's real number then?
yeah, so if you take the 500 out of Delvin, that would just put in Elkhorn,
now what's interesting too is their comparisons also include the food service budget. So it depends what you want to include or not include in
what
your
if you, can you
comparison.
tab over and change the cost to 0?
You could, like right
Just
here, you
again.
mean? Yeah,
Literally change that field to 0. If it's an editable,
then you can, yeah,
This is DPI.
yeah.
I'm
Right.
sure this is our own copy when you download.
Yeah.
right,
Yeah.
and it's fine, but
Doesn't say that,
it
but-
gives you that ability to match the
You
now
can.
numbers.
So you could look at the statewide then and put 0 in there,
Mhm.
and then that, again, as long as you do an equal comparison.
Yeah, there you go.
it's fine.
As long as you're apples to apples,
So,
that's fine.
so again,
Which all formulas come out about the same. We're about 3,000 below the state average.
Yep.
Roughly, yeah.
so,
The thing is, even with the referendum, as per the ad hoc committee's recommendation, it doesn't get us to current state average.
Right.
And keep in mind, in 4 years, that state average will be at least $1,200 more.
Yeah.
So. Yeah.
so again, my point was just, so we don't, or you don't find yourselves in an argument with John Q. Public saying, well, I looked at this source and it said
Right.
this.
Right,
Right.
It may
It's
have.
a relative comparison because each of them is basing their figures off of different
Different
parameters.
databases and different
Yeah.
parameters,
Yeah.
absolutely,
Yeah.
Kathy.
But
Yep.
the take home is we're still well below.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the
Any model.
consistent piece.
And any model,
Yeah.
we still end up on average about 3 grams in the state.
In Wisconsin, pre-2009, they even went through this at the Wilcom. I don't know if it was after you were there or not, Adam, but Wisconsin was in the top 10 on funding per pupil in the nation.
Yes.
And we are below the average. They're anticipating us being in the bottom 15.
Are you
Just in that
kidding?
span.
I thought we were like at number 27 or something now.
So that was 2-year-old data. And so then you have the COVID year where the state did 0 for
Yes.
2 years.
Yes.
That hasn't been.
That hasn't been factored
released
in.
yet.
Oh, gosh.
So when that comes out, we'll be in the bottom
COVID data's
15.
gonna
and
just skew everything.
With top five results.
We're top 5%. They're reading it now. I don't know how long that's sustainable. As a state. So that's,
Question. Other items, information. Board would like.
From for me, it's just agreeing on a concise, clear, simple statement, and then just driving it home.
Yeah.
And just being consistent throughout, and focusing on the fact that we're in support of what the ad hoc committee recommended, and we state that as part of a simple message. Because they're either going to accept that dinner out concept. And to me, when we did because I was part of that committee for the referendum, and once we found a good, clear, concise statement, it was a pretty easy sell. And there was others that we just were going to commit some.
Because they're anti-referendum.
Right.
Yeah.
There's some people that are.
I ran into
gonna go to
business
the polls
owners,
that are
and
gonna be no
they knew
no
how
matter
much it
what.
was going to affect them.
Yep.
And that was their big hangup. And so,
Yeah,
So just a bottom line up front statement of,
there you go.
we're
I
all
mean,
together.
You took your
Well,
family to Taco Bell and the bill was $70.
That's why I only go to Trace.
All right, to be fair,
What was your plumbing bill afterwards is the
and
question.
also, that is a huge problem. And I eat for free, so, yeah, $82 for 5 of us.
That's impressive, yeah.
You need to go to the consumer account and get a burrito the size of your.
I gotta go to Tracer Park, so I haven't been there in a while.
All right,
I think
Too. I mean, their menu's gone up too.
I think that is important, and I will say that the referendums that were successful, the board members really led from one, they had that unified, that consensus was there, they were all on board, there wasn't division or, secret meetings with other groups, which happened last time. I know some of you were even invited to them.
Yep.
Didn't go or whatever. There's those kind of things that wasn't, like East Troy, that board really, they were there, they were unified, that it was a clear, simple message. My role as a employee of the district, I'm very limited to, I can only inform.
Correct.
But board members as elected individuals, you don't have that same restriction.
Right.
Teachers and staff don't either outside of the workplace hours, but I'm considered on the clock all the time and billed to a certain extent too. So, I just think that's important. I know that there's a group, I think similar to when Ed, you headed up with the Booster Club. I think there's a group that's very supportive of the schools that are wanting to and are anxious to get the word out and support and communicate that. Which we didn't have last time. One, we didn't have a unified message on the board. I think we kind of felt like we did, and then it got moved at the last second, and I don't think that really was there. But we also knew that part of it was doing that referendum was just to bring an awareness to the community, because we've never had to do this type of referendum before. And so it was important to have that communication.
Certainly what's going on around the state, if people are paying attention, at least what I've talked to some people, and maybe you've got different, they're beginning, I don't want to say they're accepting, but that they're beginning to see that, well, this is not unique to Elkhorn. That This is happening in a number of areas.
This spring, that was a big eye opener for me.
I don't know where I saw it, but maybe it was on the front of one of the WASP publications where they have the scroll of all of the districts that were going to referendum
Was it
operation.
85?
Yeah.
Something.
I mean, they wrote it out in big and they rolled it out. It took the whole side of the chamber to roll over.
And I respect to a certain extent, like, and this was years ago, I don't know if Senator Nash remembers it or not, but, that was the funding model that they wanted to shift to, that we're not going to increase it at the state legislature. The whole, if you need the funds, have your community vote and pass it. It's, from their perspective, it's that simple. We're not going to increase the tax to the level, to that level. If you need it, go ask your community to make it support. That's the new model as it stands right now. Until they decide to repeg it to the inflation. And then all the districts, that's why we can absolutely live within our means if it's a fair means and allocation and maintain our building. Our districts did it for 15 years. Yeah. Future budget meeting, I know you had, I'm wondering, would it make more sense to, do we want to have it before the survey goes out or after the survey comes back and have the results?
I think after the survey comes back, so we have kind of an informed direction for, question formulation and whatnot.
I'm thinking maybe more so than in June then. And then that would give time to formulate in July, prior to the annual meeting.
If you look at our typical budget calendar, the board usually does 2 readings of the budget in June. The first reading, and then typically approves at least a preliminary budget to present to the annual meeting at the second meeting in June. So I'm not advocating a meeting here, but that would give at least 2 opportunities during the regular board meeting to review the budget.
Then what was, Brian, may have when the deadline for referendum questions?
August 27th. But I think Bill and I are discussing, I would recommend that we have it ready prior to the annual meeting, because we're
Yeah,
presenting the
so-
budget at the
Yeah,
annual meeting,
Yeah.
and we want to present that
Yep.
presumption of.
When's the annual meeting again? What?
It's the 4th Monday.
July.
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 Oh, July.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, so.
that was just technically a separate.
Well, yes, but we ended up there until after 10.
July 22nd is the annual meeting.
June 10th, I will not be here. It's my anniversary. Just wanted to bring it out so that I remember.
She
my
can come to the
anniversary.
meeting.
Huh?
She can come, she can take the whole session, we'll have food.
Yeah, probably.
I think you got married on the 9th, you're just scratching
I'm just trying to get brownie points that I remember my anniversary.
I have a family reunion, but I'll bring my whole family.
I'm married on Sunday too.
Right. Any other discussion items? The budget discussion items.
Well, we're gonna be reviewing compensation, so we're gonna have the similar schedule as what we've had before, reviewing closed session.
The next board meeting.
Okay.
Exactly.
Okay.
Because the following board meeting, you take action on the contracts.
So,
we'll discuss that from a contract standpoint. Think about what we talked about tonight, whether we look at a 3% or a 4.1%, and whether you want it all just how we want that. If we
we'll
want
be
it-
crunching numbers, that's what we did last night,
Yep.
expedite our
Yep.
review and recommendations, so just keep that in mind for us.
I'm sorry, what was that?
That we'd have access to the Excel spreadsheets.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, so this one will just be the teacher.
Okay,
Oh,
and there's, got recommendations according to peers. So for the review,
Yeah, there's groups.
this
Yeah.
group.
Yeah, the policy committee or personnel met and looked at the comparables we had
Yeah.
for professional, and even started looking at support staff.
There's just some good information there so that we're not flying blind.
right.
Yeah. And then we usually don't do like the administrative and supervisors. We do that the following month typically.
Yes.
Their contracts. Yeah.
I mean, the typical schedule would be, closed session, talk about professional staff, the board would approve the contracts on the 13th, and then also that evening meeting talked about support staff and administration, and then take action on those at the main meeting, second meeting. Okay. We usually try to get assurance letters out to our support staff before they leave for the school year, so.
Oh, yeah, that was a quick year.
So,
We have access to that. Do we have access to the sheet of count?
this is in the March one. It's important budget discussion items, so
Okay.
the March agenda, this is
Oh,
in there. Yeah. Yeah, unless there's other items, I think that's what, probably one of the biggest items to talk yet, is to work out these details.
Right.
So do we have another meeting set up?
We don't right now.
Okay.
That was the discussion point, if we wanted to.
Do you want to do another one in May or June or?
Are you gonna send around the survey to the group so we can review and comment?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wait, send the survey to the, so,
Before it goes out, are we gonna get a
Yeah.
chance to look?
oh,
at it?
I can update it and
Yeah, send it around.
send it for review.
Okay.
Yeah, and as far as the budget revenue, I did discussion, we could include that in a closes dealing with individual staff that wanted.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it involves
Yeah.
specific individuals. That's
Yeah.
a good point.
That would probably be more appropriate.
Yeah.
Yes, I agree.
So, yeah, maybe we'll look at that with, we have the compensation, maybe, we probably should discuss that a little bit to get some definitive
Right.
answers on individuals transferring or not. Or we good?
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Deal.
Aye.
Sold.